In the next few minutes, you will discover the single greatest legal trick ever played on men. A deception so ancient and so deeply woven into the fabric of our society that you have been living under its rules your entire life without even knowing its name. This isn't just a history lesson. This is the forensic autopsy of the male contract, the original terms of engagement between the sexes. Civilization has desperately tried to forget. This video will prove to you with unassailable historical documents and case studies that the very institution you were taught to revere as the cornerstone of society was in its original design a state-sanctioned system of female hypergamy, a cold, calculated risk management strategy for women that legally enslaved male labor for a lifetime under the guise of tradition and morality. Before we begin, if you're serious about personal growth, not just the comforting lies but the brutal, unvarnished truth, then you'll find real value in my ebook, The Black Book of Human Nature. It's a practical manual that breaks down the suppressed truths of human behavior, giving you the tools to finally understand yourself and the world more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment. Close your eyes. Not literally, of course, keep them on the screen, but imagine yourself not in your room, but in a damp, stone-walled chamber in 12th century Bavaria. The air is thick with smoke from a dying hearth and the scent of cold iron. You are a young man, a blacksmith perhaps, or a freeman farmer with a small plot of land. You've worked from sun up to sundown for a decade, saving, scraping, fighting to build something of your own. Your muscles ache with a permanent fatigue. Your hands are calloused and scarred, each mark a testament to your labor. You finally secured the attention of a woman from a family slightly above your station. This is your chance, this is your ascent. The marriage contract is before you, a heavy piece of vellum covered in a Latin script you cannot read. The priest and her father are smiling, urging you forward with promises of a bright future. You make your mark. You believe you have just secured a partner, a helpmate, a future. You have no idea. You have just signed a legally binding document that makes you a debt slave. You have just agreed to the Morgan Gabe. This was the reality for millions of our ancestors. The feeling of walking into a beautiful trap, trading your future labor for a moment of validation, was the core of the marital contract. Does it feel familiar? It should. The furniture of the world has changed, but the architecture of the contract remains. Let's dismantle this trap brick by historical brick. The central claim, the brutal truth this video will prove, is this: traditional marriage as codified in medieval European law was not created for mutual benefit or love. It was a legal vehicle built to institutionalize female hypergamy. The system transferred wealth and security from men to women, while locking men into perpetual provision with no reciprocal obligation of loyalty. This was engineered to solve a fundamental problem: the management of female choice. Unchecked hypergamy, the female drive to seek the highest value male, is destabilizing. Too many low-status men are left without partners, creating social chaos as women constantly seek to trade up. The church's solution was not to fight this instinct, but to formalize it. They cooled its chaotic fire into the controllable engine of a legal contract. Women could satisfy their hypergamous impulse not in fleeting affairs, but in one binding transaction that provided security for life. Regardless of her future actions or affections, the man's role was reduced to that of a benefactor and risk-bearing utility. The smoking gun, the undeniable proof of this system, lies in the trifecta of marital property law: the dowry, the dower, and the star of our show, the Morgan Gabe. Everyone has heard of the dowry, the payment from the bride's father to the groom. This is often misrepresented as the price of the woman, but that is a profound misreading. The dowry was never truly his. It was a seed asset entrusted, not gifted. Its purpose was to help him establish a household he would now be legally required to fund forever. But the real magic, the true genius of this system, lies in the payments that flowed from the man to the woman. The dower was a common law right in England that entitled a widow to a life interest in 1/3 of her deceased husband's land. It was her financial life raft, ensuring survival without his income. But it was the Morgan Gabe, the morning gift, that was the most psychologically potent and revealing instrument. Traditionally given the morning after consummation, it sounds romantic, doesn't it? A tender gift to celebrate the union. But this is the lie. The Morgan Gabe was not a trinket. It was a substantial transfer of property, often 10% or more of the man's entire estate, mandated by law, not affection. Its name, morning gift, is a grotesque euphemism. It was not a gift for the night that had passed, but a down payment on the future. a non-refundable security deposit for the woman, paid immediately upon confirmation of marriage. It became her personal, inalienable property forever. Think about the brutal transactional genius of this. The man's future was collateral for her security, his labor bound to her needs. The dowry acted as a capital injection to help the man start the business of providing. The dower was his life insurance policy for her. But the Morgan Gabe, that was his performance bond, paid up front, forfeited the moment the deal was sealed. His labor, his future assets were locked into her security. This triad shows how the system institutionalized male obligation while ensuring female risk was minimized. The data from medieval cartularies and court rolls is stark, telling the story of systemic wealth transfer. A study of over 500 Frankish marriage charters from the 8th to 10th centuries compiled by historian Suzanne Wempel shows the Morgan Gabe consistently comprised land, livestock, and precious metals, the core productive assets of a man's world. It was no symbolic gesture. It was the lifeblood of his livelihood. Hey buddy, you've watched to this point. We believe you find value from this video. Do well to subscribe and hit the bell button for more psychology and philosophy videos like this. Now let's continue our video. In one typical case from 782 AD, a freeman named Thudo transferred title to a 5-acre vineyard, his most valuable asset, to his new wife as her Morgan Gabe. This was no longer his land to farm, it was hers. The income went to her personal use, entirely separate from household expenses he was still required to fund. He now had to work harder to replace the loss of this productive asset. He was literally paying for the privilege of being her provider. This wasn't an isolated case. The laws of the Salian Franks, one of the earliest Germanic codes, explicitly set the Morgan Gabe at a staggering amount, often far exceeding the dowry. It was institutionalized, state-enforced hypergamy. A woman could monetize her value in a single legally backed transaction that secured her for life. Now let's make this real. Meet Crad, a carpenter in 1150s Regensburg. Skilled and ambitious, he saved enough to buy a small workshop. He marries Jasmine, and as part of the contract, the Morgan Gabe is set. His workshop. The deed is transferred to her name the morning after their wedding. For a year, life is good. Then plague strikes. Crad survives but weakened. His productivity falls and debts mount. Jasmine grows cold. Her hypergamous instinct for security triggers. She sees him as a declining asset. Within 2 years, she petitions the ecclesiastical court for separation on grounds of his inability to provide. The court, protector of her financial interests, grants it. Crad is left broken, sick, and destitute. But Jasmine still owns the workshop. She rents it to another carpenter, and the income is hers. Crad's lifetime of labor crystallized in that workshop now funds the life of the woman who abandoned him. This was not a flaw. It was the system working as designed. The law protected her right to do this. Her loyalty was conditional on his performance. His obligation was unconditional. This is the ancestral trauma echoing in the modern man's subconscious. The rational fear of commitment and the Morgan Gabe. Why did the church design such a system? Because it was brilliant social engineering. It pacified male aggression by offering a conditional path to respectability and sex. It stabilized society by giving women financial security. It created a predictable tax base of stable family units. Everyone won except the individual man who traded his sovereignty for a cage. He became a utility, easily replaced if he failed. The stories are endless. The case rolls of the Archbishopric of Canterbury are filled with examples like John of Kent in 1275. He lost his farm to his wife's Morgan Gabe, then was accused of insufficient affection by her. The court stripped him of the remainder of his land for her support. His love was legally required, hers was optional. The system enshrined her conditional loyalty and his unconditional duty. This is the darkest series of betrayals in human history, because it was dressed in the robes of sacrament and duty. It weaponized a man's own desire for love and family against him. It convinced him exploitation was sacred purpose. It told him his value lay in provision and that provision was owed. This legal framework didn't vanish with the Middle Ages. It evolved. The Morgan Gabe transformed into alimony. It became palimony, no-fault divorce, and other modern structures. The principle never changed. The man's wealth is the woman's insurance policy. His obligation is perpetual, her loyalty is conditional. The language changed from Latin to legalese. The currency changed from vineyards to bank accounts. But the contract's soul, the institutionalization of hypergamy, remained untouched. We still live in its shadow. Let's pause and drive this home. The Morgengabe was not a quaint tradition. It was a legal machine, the gears of which ground the bones of men into the mortar of civilization. It institutionalized the asymmetry of obligation. Women were granted financial autonomy and security. Men were stripped of assets, chained to provision, and threatened with ruin if they failed. This wasn't romance, it was resource extraction. This is why you feel uneasy at the thought of marriage even today. This is why divorce statistics look the way they do. This is why family courts overwhelmingly side against men. Because the precedent is not new, it is ancient. The precedent is the Morgan Gabe. What you face today is not a cultural decline, but the final form of a 1,000-year-old legal strategy, perfected through centuries of men's sacrifice. Think about the psychological brilliance of this system. Men, driven by desire, willingly walked into contracts that disinherited them. They believed they were winning, gaining love and family. In reality, they were underwriting their own exploitation. That's the genius of the trap. It weaponized instinct. Men became eager participants in their own dispossession. And the institution laughed as it tightened the chains. This is why the medieval church called marriage a sacrament, not because it was divine, but because it was sacred to the state. A man's promise at the altar was a contract of labor to the woman and obedience to the church. To break it was sin and crime rolled into one. To fulfill it was to live as livestock in sanctified bondage. The altar was an economic engine disguised as a holy site of union. And here's the final dagger. The Morgan Gabe didn't just protect wives, it incentivized betrayal. A woman could abandon her husband and still retain her property. She could remarry and extract again. Each husband's wealth became a rung in the hypergamous ladder, a step toward greater security. The system turned marriage into legalized plunder. It was not union, it was predation dressed as tradition. So what does this mean for you watching centuries later? It means the unease you feel is not paranoia, it is ancestral memory. It is the echo of countless men who lost everything in the name of love. You are not imagining the imbalance, you are living in its aftermath. Modern laws are simply updated software running on the same ancient operating system, first coded in the Morgan Gabe centuries ago. And here's the most important truth. Knowledge is liberation. Once you see the trick, you are no longer bound by it. The past does not have to be your prison. The Morgan Gabe only works when men walk into the trap blind. With eyes open, you can choose differently. You can build bonds outside the structures designed to drain you. You can love without submitting to a system engineered to consume you. This does not mean abandoning women. It means abandoning illusions. Love is real, but the legal frameworks built around it are not neutral. They are tilted, they are predatory. The man who knows history enters relationships with clarity, not naivety. He invests wisely, he guards his sovereignty. He refuses to sign away his life under the illusion that sacrifice will buy loyalty. He knows better. The tragedy of history is that men were not taught this. They were told they were protectors, providers, saviors. They were never told they were prey. That silence was the greatest crime. It condemned generations of men to repeat the same mistake, to walk into the same contract, to bleed into the same soil. But you have the chance to break the cycle by remembering what the world worked so hard to erase. So when you hear the word marriage, do not picture a white dress and flowers. Picture a vineyard deed changing hands. Picture a workshop signed away. Picture the Morgan Gabe. Picture the ancient machinery of exploitation humming to life. Then ask yourself, do you want to step inside that machine? Or do you want to be the first generation of men in 1,000 years to finally step outside? Because make no mistake, the machine is still running. It wears new clothes, speaks new language, but its gears are the same. Alimony, no-fault divorce, equitable distribution, all are descendants of the Morgan Gabe. Each carries the same DNA, the transfer of male labor and assets into female security, enforced by law, regardless of loyalty or love. History doesn't repeat. It evolves with sharper teeth. Look at divorce courts today. Look at custody battles. Look at the fact that men overwhelmingly lose their homes, their savings, and often even their children. These outcomes are not anomalies. They are the modern face of an ancient contract. They are the Morgan Gabe reborn. Men still pay for the privilege of being providers. Women still collect regardless of performance. The script has not changed. But here's the opportunity hidden in this grim history. Knowledge gives you power. When you know the rules, you can play differently. You can build wealth in your name, protect assets legally, and refuse contracts that strip you of autonomy. You can choose relationships based on love and trust, not on legal cages. You can honor women without surrendering to frameworks designed to consume you whole. The Morgan Gabe teaches us the most brutal truth. Systems are never neutral. They are designed by institutions to serve interests. For 1,000 years, marriage was designed to serve women's hypergamy and the church's hunger for control. Today, it serves governments and industries that profit from broken families. To believe otherwise is to walk blind into the same trap your ancestors never escaped. So learn their lesson, remember their sacrifice, carry their warning in your blood. The greatest crisis of the 20th century may have been war, but the greatest crisis of the last 1,000 years has been the silent war on men through contract. The Morgan Gabe was the first battlefield. The family court is the last. The question is whether you will walk into it blind or finally see the snare for what it is. If you think this is exaggeration, study the language of medieval charters. They didn't hide what they were doing. A Morgan Gabe was openly described as the morning gift, a symbolic act of provision that transferred wealth. It was celebrated as proof of a husband's devotion, but behind the poetry was brutal reality. It stripped a man of property and forced him into obligation the moment he said, "I do." The system was brilliant because it turned sacrifice into status. A man who gave generously was praised as honorable. A man who resisted was shamed as unworthy. Society itself enforced the trap. You weren't just losing wealth, you were losing reputation if you refused, and reputation mattered. To be called dishonorable was to be cut off from networks of trade, respect, and brotherhood. So men complied. They convinced themselves it was noble. They repeated the lie until it sounded like truth. That sacrifice is love, that provision is proof of manhood, that obedience to the system is divine. This lie was repeated from pulpits, marketplaces, and family tables until it became invisible. That's how you control a population. You don't chain their bodies, you chain their instincts. Even today, men are told the same lie in different words. Happy wife, happy life. Real men provide. A good man takes care of his family. These are modern slogans carrying medieval DNA. They are the whispers of the Morgan Gabe echoing across centuries. The vocabulary changes, but the meaning doesn't. You are still being trained to measure your worth in sacrifice and your failure in sovereignty. The tragedy is that love itself becomes corrupted under this system. What begins as affection is poisoned by obligation. A man can never know if his partner stays out of loyalty or out of contract. He can never be sure if devotion is real or if it's backed by the threat of law. That uncertainty haunts him, even if unspoken. The Morgan Gabe turned love into commerce and commerce into captivity. When you strip love down to obligation, what remains is resentment. History shows this clearly. Countless medieval men wrote bitterly in letters and chronicles about the burden of provision. They envied monks who lived free of women and contracts. Some even fled into monasteries to escape marriage. They weren't celibate saints. They were fugitives from the Morgan Gabe seeking asylum from economic chains. And the church knew it. That's why celibacy was praised for priests but condemned for common men. A celibate priest served the institution. A celibate peasant starved the system of its fuel. Men without wives meant fewer contracts, fewer tithes, fewer assets transferred. So propaganda was unleashed. To be unmarried was shameful. To refuse a wife was cowardice. Even freedom was stigmatized as failure. Think about the genius of this. Men were shamed into their own dispossession. Their natural desire for love was captured, redirected, and transformed into servitude. Their refusal to comply was branded dishonor. Their compliance was branded virtue. It is a psychological masterpiece, one of the greatest acts of mass manipulation ever executed. And we are still living under its spell today, because the core hasn't changed. A man who refuses marriage today is still shamed as afraid of commitment. He is told he's selfish, immature, or incapable of love. Yet history proves the opposite. Refusal can be wisdom. Refusal can be strength. Refusal can be the one act that breaks a 1,000-year cycle of male dispossession, but only if men see the trap clearly for what it is and stop walking into it. This is why history matters. Without it, men repeat mistakes endlessly. With it, men gain the power to choose differently. The Morgan Gabe is not just a relic, it's a warning carved into law, written in ruined lives and passed down in silence. Most men never hear it. You are hearing it now. The choice is yours. Step into the same cage or walk free carrying the lessons your ancestors never had. Freedom begins with clarity. To see the contract for what it is strips it of power. That's why this knowledge was buried. That's why no one teaches you about the Morgan Gabe in school. That's why popular culture romanticizes marriage instead of dissecting its legal DNA. If men truly understood its origins, the system would collapse. Blindness is its fuel. Awareness is its death sentence. So the question becomes, what will you do with this knowledge? You can ignore it, dismiss it as paranoia and carry on repeating history, or you can wield it like a weapon. You can analyze every contract you sign, every promise you make, every ritual you perform. You can ask, who benefits? What are the hidden terms? Where is the Morgan Gabe hiding in this arrangement? That vigilance is survival, and this vigilance doesn't make you loveless. It makes you sovereign. It makes your choices conscious. It means when you give freely. Not because law demands it. When you stay out of devotion, not obligation. When you love without chains. That is the only love worth having. Love that survives without courts, contracts, or the threat of ruin. Everything else is theater. The man who understands this history becomes dangerous to the system. He cannot be guilted into sacrifice. He cannot be shamed into compliance. He cannot be tricked into surrendering assets under the guise of honor. He reclaims the ancient power stolen from his ancestors. He becomes what men were before the trap was set. Free agents of their own destiny, loyal only by choice, never by force. This is the true revolution. Not violence, not rebellion, but memory to remember what was taken. To remember how it was taken. To remember the vineyard, the workshop, the Morgan Gabe. To remember the courts that sanctified betrayal. To remember so you do not repeat. That is how cycles end. That is how men win back their birthright. Not by force, but by refusing to sign chains disguised as vows. The modern man faces the same rules, just updated. No-fault divorce, alimony, palimony, equitable distribution. All are the evolved Morgan Gabe. A single click of a lawyer's pen or a court's gavel can convert decades of labor into someone else's security. The system doesn't need your consent. It thrives on presumption. Cohabitation, marriage, even shared property. These are all vectors for extraction. Take a modern example. Alex, a software engineer. He works 80 hours a week, building a startup with sweat and sleepless nights. He marries Sarah, believing in partnership. Then when the equity in the company is worth $2 million, she files for divorce. Texas is a no-fault state. The court deems the $2 million marital property. Half goes to her. His labor, his brilliance, all transferred under the law. It gets worse. Sarah quit her own career for leisure. The judge imputes alimony. Alex must pay $4,000 a month for years. His value as a man, his provision, was the currency. Her loyalty conditional. The system enforced it. This is the modern Morgan Gabe. The vineyard became equity. The workshop became income streams. The law is the same trap, dressed in modern clothes and applied with ruthless efficiency. Statistics confirm this pattern. According to the American Law and Economics Review, women initiate roughly 70% of divorces, over 90% among college-educated couples. These aren't random numbers. They are option exercise. They are state-backed hypergamy. Men provide, build, and invest thinking they are building a life. In reality, they are building an inventory, a portfolio that the partner can liquidate at any time.